In the mid-19th century, a secularized Jew from Germany immigrated to London seeking intellectual freedom. Life was harsh. The world faced severe overpopulation, making human life very cheap. Working 12-hour days, 6 days a week, was common, and issues such as starvation, riots, and problems stemming from industrialization were widespread. Western Europe was undergoing significant social changes due to the early stages of the Industrial Revolution. Peasants, who had lived in stable village communities for millennia, were being crammed into cities, often sharing cramped quarters with multiple families. The collapse of traditional social structures led to a mental health crisis, social chaos, and increased stress. The old system, where most people were independent farmers, was replaced by exploitative employer-employee relationships due to inexperience and overpopulation. Amidst this upheaval, many people longed for simpler social structures. Atheism and agnosticism, once common among the 18th century elite, became more widespread among the general population with the French Revolution. For someone like Marx, from the German Rhineland, the atheist influence of the French, who had ruled the region for about 20 years, made questioning God's existence more commonplace. While the average person remained deeply religious, thinkers like Nietzsche foresaw the rise of atheistic Europe in the 20th century. At the same time, political and economic repression was severe. The French Revolution and the subsequent Napoleonic Empire were brutally suppressed, leading to the establishment of conservative religious states across Europe. Extreme repression and classism prevailed, with the poor paying higher taxes than the rich and harsh penalties for minor crimes like stealing bread. The wealthy, fearing another revolution, sought to suppress the poor to prevent any potential uprising. These social issues led to a series of democratic rebellions in 1848, which were also crushed. Amidst this turmoil, Marx wrote his book. While Marx's emergence might not have been inevitable, the rapid changes of the time made the ideas of communism seem particularly relevant. Marx's vision portrayed a world where the rich oppressed the poor and maintained a system that kept the working class subdued, encapsulating his philosophy of class struggle. Marx's thesis seemed correct, since in the mid-19th century everywhere was tough except for North America. Around the Third World, there were horrifying wars and rebellions that break out across the world as a reaction to the condition. This includes the Taiping Rebellion in China, the third bloodiest war in history, which killed 30 million people, famines in India which also killed 30 million, and the famine of 1876 which killed 70 million people around the world, which is more than World War II. When Marx was writing, this looked to be the path Western Europe would go down. However, the irony is that the exact opposite happened. Western Europe, for the 150 years after Marx, saw extremely rapid growth in standard of living and social mobility. Much of the dirt-poor working class in Marx's time became comfortable middle class due to increases in productivity. By the time of World War I, the average person worked fewer hours, was much better fed, housed, and about everything else. This was also part of the reason for why there was such profound patriotism around World War I, since people were proud of the progress of their societies. The reason many are willing to fight the World War was because they see their society grow and prosper under capitalism. The key problem is that the failings Marx blamed upon capitalism were, in fact, just aspects of human existence. Non-capitalist societies experience them as well. However, the great irony is that capitalist societies were the only ones able to escape this trap of class warfare, since capitalism allowed enough social mobility and technological progress. Communism never had much appeal in actually capitalist societies for this reason, and was only able to garner support in the feudal agricultural nations like Vietnam, Russia, Cuba, or China, since capitalism worked to bring wealth to the West. Marx said that communist revolutions would only happen in the very most developed nations. However, what happened in the real world is that the most developed countries, when they picked an authoritarianism, universally went for fascism, and only agrarian, non-industrial ones were communist. But one of communism's most insidious and telling aspects is its conflation of capitalism with things normal for human existence. Marx was a secularized Jew. In many ways, being a secularized Jew was a difficult position to be in because Gentile Christian societies rejected and oppressed Jews for thousands of years across Europe. So, the Jews build a very intact social community. But once they left this community by denouncing religion, they found themselves between a rock and a hard place, rejected by both the outside society and the Jewish community. Throughout history, secular Jews often held a nihilistic view of the world, believing that life lacks inherent meaning and that nations or social communities have no intrinsic positive value. This feeling of rejection by broader society led to several philosophical trajectories among secular Jews. One of the biggest demographics for communism, for this reason, is secular Jews. Despite this, Jews have made numerous positive philosophical and religious contributions throughout history, such as those by Einstein, Spinoza, Jesus, Moses, and others. In many ways, modern Western society is built on Jewish philosophy. However, Jewish philosophy also exhibits certain cognitive biases, one of which is apocalyptic thinking. Abrahamic philosophy believes that a time will come when the world order will completely change, and the laws of Darwinian competition will cease. It also suggests that if people are good and do the right thing, they can break the laws of the universe. However, this is not true, as Darwinian struggle and life's hardships have been constants throughout history and will never change. Marxism, in many ways, is an apocalyptic philosophy, envisioning a point where the working classes will drive out the rich, leading to a utopian society. Fundamentally, Marx believes in progress and the march of history, which aligns with Western thought of Christianity and Judaism. In ancient Rome and Greece, the concept of time was cyclical, with no notion of progress, similar to the modern belief in reincarnation. Christianity diverged from this view, not believing in rebirth or reincarnation. Instead, it believes in the passage of time bringing humanity closer to the divine and culminating in a final judgment, introducing the notion of progress. Communism can be seen as fundamentally a Christian philosophy because it bases all its assumptions on Christian theology. It posits that nothing is objective, and everything is subjective. The only good and bad things in the world depend on the perceiver. This collective subjectivity crystallizes in society to become social norms, with concepts like morality, God, and evil becoming subjects of human interpretation. Equality, progress, and poverty are neutral concepts, becoming good or bad only after moral judgment by humans. Thus, communism is fundamentally a moral judgment based on Christian ideology. It provides community, a worldview, rituals, and a sense of the sacred, akin to a religion. Communism can be classified as a religion, even though it lacks a god, because a religion doesn't necessarily require a deity, as seen in Buddhism and Confucianism. Communism also occupies the same psychological space as religion, as evidenced by the difficulty in convincing communists of the irrationality of their beliefs. Convincing a communist that their assumptions are wrong is like trying to convince a Catholic that the Virgin Mary never existed. The main reason communists get offended at being called a religion is that they view all religions as false, according to Marx. However, this mirrors religious claims of exclusive truth, with each religion asserting that it is the true one and all others are false. Communism is very clearly part of the Abrahamic tradition. Examples of this include the belief in a clear distinction between good and evil, the concept of a rapture followed by the saved entering a utopia or heaven while the damned face their fate, the construction of a church to pursue these goals, and an insistence on the meek uniting around shared book to fight against evil, led by a prophet. Additionally, the belief in universality, a characteristic peculiar to Abrahamic and axial religions, suggests that their message is meant to be universal, uniting all peoples and cultures under a shared new religion. Communism can be seen as a distorted reflection of Christianity, with many of its supposedly objective rational beliefs stemming from what they would consider irrational Christian beliefs. such as the equality of all people and the importance of progress. In non-Western cultures, these beliefs are not taken for granted. They view progress as cyclical rather than linear, and they do not inherently see equality as a virtue. Nietzsche and the Nazis represent a genuine attempt to move beyond a Christian value system, while Marxism mirrors Christianity. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch fundamentally departs from Christian morality, which he described as slave morality. In contrast, communism perpetuates the assumptions of Christianity. The theologian René Girard suggested that evil often takes on the outward trappings of good, but performs the exact opposite actions. Communism, with its outward resemblance to Christianity, ultimately promotes the idea of killing the rich and installing an autocratic state while lacking a sense of moral values or standards. This is because it adopts aspects of Christian morality without the objective God that provides those standards. In essence, communism is Christianity without the objective God. Humans possess both masculine and feminine traits. This is not strictly biological. Each person exists on a spectrum without moral judgment. A biologically male individual can exhibit more feminine traits than another male. This aspect of the human condition is shaped by gender social conditioning. Ideally, mothers provide psychological stability and unconditional love, while fathers instill discipline and prepare children to be competent actors in the real world. Throughout history, societies have balanced masculine and feminine traits. In Japan, this balance is seen in Zen Buddhism and Bushido, while in the West, it has been represented by the rational, aggressive warrior tradition of Indo-European heritage and the Judeo-Christian tradition. Traditionally, aristocracies were trained in Greek logic and heroic tales, emphasizing aggressive masculinity. In contrast, peasants found motivation in Christianity, which helped them endure harsh realities and oppressive hierarchies. But as the former peasants rose to political power during the industrial period and women gained larger societal roles, Christianity transformed into a political ideology devoid of its theology, leading to the creation of communism. Just as there is toxic masculinity, there is also toxic femininity. Communism can be seen as a toxically feminine worldview, while Nazism represents toxic masculinity. Toxic femininity includes traits like envy, shaming for social power, relational warfare, materialism, avoiding responsibility, using empathy when logic is needed, magical thinking, and a desire for equality at the expense of merit. This reflects communism, as studies show that people with more feminine-oriented personalities, including many men, often align with leftist ideologies. The assumption of human equality, while appealing, is flawed because not everyone has the same abilities. This belief in equality, rooted in Christianity, resonates with those who externalize family relations to politics. Liberalism advocates for legal equality and merit-based opportunities through education. In contrast, communism seeks equal outcomes by mirroring family dynamics, where everything is shared, reflecting women's traditional roles as gatherers. This approach is intuitively appealing to those with more agreeable, feminine mindsets, who view it as the best way to manage society and avoid conflict. For example, John Lennon's song, Imagine, envisions a world without heaven, hell, or division, where there is no suffering. This vision aligns with feminine ideals, which are not competitive. However, a world where everyone is the same, regardless of effort or ability, lacks adventure and purpose. For men, a life without something worth dying for is also one without meaning. While some find Imagine to be a paradise, this reflects a more feminine psychology, contrasting with a masculine view of such a world as a nightmare. Societies are often driven by guiding emotions. In the West, guilt is the primary emotion, while shame is prevalent in most Asian societies, and fear and tribal affiliations dominate other cultures around the world. Communism, however, is driven by envy. The motivation behind communist revolutions is the destruction of the wealthy. Once the wealthy are eliminated, Communists often turn on their own social structure, revealing a lack of alternative values. Despite its numerous failures and the millions of deaths it has caused, communism remains popular among intellectuals. If the true goal is to help the poor, more successful ideologies should be considered. Religion, historically, has also played a significant role in helping the poor and maintaining social order. Therefore, religion should be examined and not abandoned, as it has often been more effective than other belief systems in these regards. Under communism, not only are the rich targeted, but middle-class individuals are also attacked, leading to widespread starvation among the poor. This indicates that the focus of communism is more on harming the affluent than on aiding the impoverished, epitomizing envy. Communism is based on a series of incorrect assumptions about the natural order of the world. Firstly, it assumes that economic growth and progress will occur naturally. However, throughout history, these occurrences have been rare and can easily be replaced by stagnation. Societies often experience gradual changes with many ups and downs, sometimes leading to stagnation or collapse. Progress is not inherently natural. The assumption that it will inevitably happen is rooted in Christian theology rather than rationality. Therefore, if a society values progress, it should encourage and support individuals who are actively contributing to economic growth and innovation. Unfortunately, communists tend to focus more on how wealth is divided rather than how it is produced. Secondly, history has shown that most progress and innovation occur under conditions of Darwinian competition. From ancient Chinese states emerging from periods of endless bloodshed to the Industrial Revolution and World Wars, progress has been driven by competition. Even large centralized programs, such as the creation of the Internet, which involved extensive government intervention, are ultimately driven by competition with other states. Therefore, if a society values progress, it must encourage competition as a catalyst for innovation. While innovation can occur under a powerful state, it often requires more resources and may not reach its maximum potential. For example, Imperial China invented gunpowder and built large ships, but it was the West, driven by competition and necessity, that utilized these innovations most effectively. Communists also assume everyone has equal morality, capability, and drive, which is not true at all and can be very easily proven to not be true. They assume that human nature does not exist, and every aspect of human culture can be programmed by socialization or education. This is called the blank slate and has also been proven to be completely scientifically false. They assume men and women are mentally the same, which has also been proven to be false. Communism asserts that rulers are purely evil and the oppressed are purely good, which is an oversimplification that doesn't hold true in every instance. In reality, it is much more complicated. Everyone possesses both negative and positive traits, and rulers or successful groups must exhibit some degree of competence and virtue to attain and maintain power. The notion that ruling and wielding power is easy is misguided. In fact, effective leadership requires significant skill and effort. Communism starts with so many easily provable false premises about equality that it's doomed in the real world. Communism starts with what it wants to be reality, and then is shocked when real conditions don't match up with it. Worse than that even, they shame and try to destroy the careers of anyone who disagrees with their fantasies for how they want the world to operate. Communists compare the current society to a utopia, since they are operating under false premises, as said before. They cannot realize that capitalism is an imperfect choice in a world of many terrible choices. Communists think that capitalism causes poverty, oppression, inequality, and everything else since they believe human nature is perfectible and naturally good, and thus there can be a perfect alternative that we're missing. However, comparing democratic capitalist societies to others across history or the world shows them to be better at achieving the goals communists aspire to, including those in communist societies. Critics often make flawed comparisons by juxtaposing capitalist states with planned ones unfairly. For instance, Comparing Brazil to the USSR is incorrect. The correct comparison should be between the USA and the USSR, as they have similar conditions and potential. Communists have an open view of the world, believing that humans are inherently perfectible and good by nature. They argue that oppression makes them bad and life harder. So any difference that could be seen is caused by oppression, whether between ethnicities, genders, or social classes. Meanwhile, the constrained vision of the world is held by most other philosophies over history, especially in the pre-modern world and by capitalism. In this view, humans are tied down by many factors, driven by things like geography, history, luck, or any other factor outside of human control. Humans are naturally flawed, and society must be structured around those flaws. For example, the American revolutionaries made all these checks and balances so that a single person couldn't seize power. It's interesting to look at the French Revolution and the American Revolution, both of which are fundamentally liberal revolutions. The American Constitution, built off the constrained vision, has lasted for 250 years without interruption. Meanwhile, the French Revolution, built off the open vision, degenerated into tyranny within several months. The open vision sounds incredibly enticing because it paints the people pushing it as liberators. Since humanity is naturally good, they don't have to self-reflect because they're the good people trying to save the world, and they can't do any wrong. While the capitalists are the bad, evil people oppressing the good guys, they see morality in a Christian moral view, of either and or. Something is entirely good or entirely bad. They see the capitalist as incompetent bad guys, but if the capitalists are so stupid, how could they keep their position or gain it? Then they say people who praise the ruling class are kissing the boots of the oppressors. They see the world as us versus them. There is a very strong ideological line of dissent for communism and Gnosticism, a Christian sect. Gnosticism was a religion from the Hellenistic period, tracing back to before the birth of Christ and later evolved into a sect of Christians. Gnostic beliefs are fascinating. They hold that the God of the Old Testament is the devil who made an evil and crooked world to torture humanity. Meanwhile, the figure whom Christians call the devil gave mankind the fruit of knowledge to liberate him, and Jesus is just trying to liberate human from the God of the Old Testament, who is the devil. Basically, they swapped the Christian devil and God for the other position. The founding truth of Gnosticism is that man is a God who needs to realize his inherent divinity, while that of Christianity is the exact opposite. Humans are not God and ought to remain humble and submit themselves to God. The Gnostics claim they're an association of people who realize this hidden truth, or the gnosis, which is Greek for knowledge. By joining the Gnostics, people gain hidden knowledge that others outside do not have. This is why, when people debate a communist, they'll say to the other side they don't understand Marxism or they need to study Marxism more, even after reading thousands of pages on the subject. They believe that once someone understands its hidden truth, they will immediately convert. Thus in their mind someone can't really understand and disagree with good faith. Both communism and Gnosticism say that they have the real knowledge and make definitions of what is correct knowledge in order to exclude outsiders since they do not have real knowledge. This doesn't allow any external criticism. This is where communists get the view that the world is inherently oppressive and they are part of a group of the anointed to destroy its oppression, since that's literally what Gnostics believe in. Both Gnosticism and communism posit that once you tear down the oppression, they will live in a utopia. However, the reality is they don't have a real plan. The worldview posited by Marxism and Gnosticism literally fits the definition of a conspiracy theory. The difference between an actual articulate worldview and a conspiracy theory is that the former acknowledges the perspectives and self-interests of various factions, while the latter imagines a unified effort by all factions against a single group. In Lenin's time, it was believed that the entire European elite had conspired to crush the working classes. However, the reality throughout history is that elites are often divided, with foreign elites sometimes supporting rebels in other countries for their own benefit. The notion that every elite in the West is part of a giant conspiracy to prevent any communist experiment is another example of such a conspiracy theory. In ancient philosophy, there was magic that was right-handed and left-handed. Right-handed magic was magic that priests would do, which was magic that came from God, from humility, through sublimating beneath God's message. Then there was left-handed magic, which was magic that came from the individual trying to take divine power for herself. Right-handed magic came through God's goodwill or multiple gods in the pre-Christian world, and left-handed magic had to come through causing suffering for other people and taking energy from elsewhere. Between the constrained and unconstrained visions, left-handed magic corresponds to the unconstrained vision, akin to leftist politics, which posits that humans are inherently perfectible and can become godlike. Meanwhile, the constrained vision is like right-handed magic, suggesting that people should first recognize their limitations and then grow through understanding and working within those limitations. The successes and failures of the constrained vision reflect this approach, emphasizing realistic self-assessment and incremental growth. The connection between ancient philosophy and modern thought might seem tenuous, but there are tangible links, particularly through the influence of Gnosticism. Gnostics operated in hidden associations, for which there is ample evidence, dismissing the notion that this is a conspiracy theory. Heretics like the Cathars were Gnostics, and numerous Gnostic mystic associations or clubs existed in early modern Europe. These ideas were widely circulated among the educated community. Germany, in particular, was a hotbed for such associations. In a highly religious society where every educated person studied some degree of religious philosophy, these Gnostic ideas found fertile ground. Hegel, who had studied these philosophies, likely participated in one of these secret philosophical associations, as suggested by his use of Gnostic language and terminology throughout his work. Hegel, in turn, was the biggest influence on Marx, establishing an intellectual line from ancient Gnosticism to modern Marxist. So the idea that communism is a fleshing out of this ancient Christian cult is not entirely unfounded. The right and left hemispheres of the brain function differently, each with distinct capabilities and tendencies. The right hemisphere excels in understanding individual circumstances, perceiving living things, and grasping the truth in context. It consistently arrives at correct answers more often than the left hemisphere. The left hemisphere, on the other hand, focuses on systems, control, and mechanical processes. The right hemisphere, the master, should lead, with the left hemisphere serving as the emissary to execute its vision in the world. However, as the modern world has progressed, society has betrayed the right hemisphere, building worldviews solely based on the left hemisphere's perspective. Left hemisphere worldviews operate through an abdication of responsibility, adhering strictly to processes without looking beyond them. This narrow focus leads to incorrect conclusions, and the left hemisphere is incapable of recognizing or admitting its errors. It is obsessed with the material over the living and the physical, unable to understand or believe in non-material concepts. Marxism exemplifies a failed left hemisphere worldview. Individuals stuck in the left brain are incapable of offering constructive criticism because they cannot think outside their own thought processes. When they criticize others, they are often projecting their own faults. This irony is evident in communists, who blame society for being obsessed with power, cynical, and devoid of values. Once in power, they repress society and turn it into a tool for their own repressive ends, embodying the very issues they criticize. Communism envisions a world devoid of personal responsibility, where the unsuccessful are never judged more harshly than the successful. In this view, the losers are always seen as good, regardless of their actions, and the successful as bad, irrespective of their deeds. This perspective contradicts Darwinism, which emphasizes the survival of the fittest, a concept broadly accepted in principle. Philosophically, communism completely rejects Darwinian science. Communists believe that hierarchy and oppression are inherently bad, failing to recognize that modern society operates on and requires these aspects to function. Oppression and hierarchy are byproducts of wealth, and if a society values wealth and progress, it must accept some form of hierarchy. Some communists realize that growth often requires exploitation, and believe that the rapid growth the modern world is experiencing might be excessive. They advocate for this growth to be slowed down, stopped, or entirely destroyed. However, such a slowdown or halt could mean death for many, as modern society now requires continuous growth to function effectively. With the rejection of standards, communists lack accountability when they seize power. They don't consider who is responsible for building their utopia or have a real plan. Instead, they rely on magical thinking, assuming everything will work out. This has historically led to the rise of some of the most horrifying autocracies, as a society built on the abdication of responsibility naturally falls under despotic rulers. This abdication of responsibility is evident in the ideas of Rousseau, probably Marx's biggest influence. Marxism fully fleshes out Rousseau's ideas and the ideals of the French Revolution. Rousseau believed that the will of the people, as manifested in an authoritarian ruler, was paramount. This concept is incredibly vague and falls into communism's biggest mental fallacy, assuming human nature is perfectible and inherently good. Both communism and Rousseau assert that humans are naturally good and that oppressive institutions corrupt them. Consequently, an authoritarian ruler claims to rule on behalf of the people, but the philosophy lacks democratic mechanisms to verify this claim. It results in a terrifying autocracy where everything the ruler does is justified as the will of the people, with no actual way to determine that the peoples will accept what the autocrat declares. Philosophy is inseparable from the philosopher who created it. Men like Socrates, Jesus, Buddha, and Marcus Aurelius, considered saints in their time, have had their worldviews respected and successful ever since. Meanwhile, Nietzsche, who argued for masculinity and violence, was largely unsuccessful and marginalized during his life. Society must question whether a philosophy is an unhealthy manifestation of traits the philosopher is apologizing for and has not mastered. If a philosopher cannot master their own philosophy, they cannot articulate it realistically. This scrutiny makes Rousseau and Marx appear significantly flawed. Marx, for instance, was financially destitute for most of his life, refusing to hold a job, which led to the starvation of 2 of his children. Despite his education, he failed to provide for his family, cheated on his wife with their unpaid maid, and prevented his children from visiting their mother. He was known for his cruel, authoritarian, and even racist behavior, and was also a plagiarist. Similarly, Voltaire refused to hold a job, committed adultery, and let several of his children die of starvation due to his laziness. He had a peculiar relationship with his mother, reportedly enjoying being spanked by her. If we accept that philosophy is inseparable from the philosopher who created it, and that personal failings of philosophers reflect on the validity of their ideas, this has significant implications for communism. Marx's personal shortcomings, his financial irresponsibility, neglect of his family, authoritarian tendencies, and unethical behavior, could suggest that his philosophy of communism may similarly be flawed and impractical. These personal traits and behaviors indicate that Marx might have projected his unresolved issues into his ideology. If a philosophy is an unhealthy manifestation of traits its creator has not mastered, communism might reflect Marx's own struggles with responsibility, ethics, and personal conduct. This connection raises questions about the feasibility and moral foundation of communism, given that its progenitor exemplified many traits that are counterproductive to building a fair and functional society. Thus, the flaws in Marx's personal life cast doubt on the practicality and ethical grounding of his philosophical vision, suggesting that communism, as derived from his ideas, may inherently carry the same issues. Communism went from being the writings of a broke intellectual to a mass ideology that ruled 1/3 of the human race in less than a century. Which groups were most interested in Marx's message and capable of spreading it globally? One obvious choice was the working class. However, this support was not universal. Marxism was popular among the non-property holding working classes. In most wealthy industrial countries, the working classes became property owners and relatively well off. However, unions, which often aligned with communist ideals, remained a stronghold of Marxist thought since it served their self-interest. Friedrich Hayek, writing in the 1930s, noted that the elite of the proletariat, wealthy and powerful union leaders and tradesmen, often influenced political parties and ran cities. These individuals, although technically working class, were quite well off and formed a bulwark of Marxist leadership in Europe. In recent decades, however, another group has proven to be even more influential in the Marxist camp: intellectuals, professors, and teachers. This group, often highly intelligent but lacking courage, discipline, or other societal requisites, harbors envy toward businessmen and politicians who possess money and power. For many academics, the only path to power lies through a Marxist autocratic state, where intellectuals can ascend. Marxist revolutions are typically spearheaded by academics, often in countries where the working classes are small, such as China or Russia. Additionally, for various reasons, women and feminine-minded men are also drawn to communism. Revolutionary leaders often start with moral righteousness, believing they are doing what is right, but they tend to fall into the hands of autocrats or become autocrats themselves when they realize that force is necessary to implement their vision. A key point is that communist revolutions cannot happen peacefully, as they require the rich to relinquish their property, necessitating force. The interesting thing is that Marxist states did not develop in the highly advanced capitalist countries that Marx predicted they would. Rather, they emerged in feudal, pre-industrial societies such as China, Russia, and Cuba. All the societies that willingly embraced communism shared a similar family structure characterized by the out-marrying clan. In these societies, family members remained within the same unit, with the father arranging marriages for his sons and providing work while maintaining authoritarian power. Upon the father's death, his sons would inherit equally. People's family structures modeled what they naturally believed to be fair, having grown up with such norms. This normalization of authoritarianism, equality, and communism within the family structure made these concepts seem natural. As empires broke down with modernity and peasants rose to power, they created governmental systems that mirrored their familial clans. In these societies, people spent their entire lives with their families. Parents arranged their marriages, secured work for them, and once the sons married, they all lived under the same roof as their father. When modernity caused the old family structures to break down, people felt atomized, a sensation unfamiliar in their societies. Consequently, they turned to the state to fill the void left by their families. An interesting side note is the political triangle where the three edges are communism, individualism, and hierarchy, representing the three possible economic relations in human societies, with different societies adopting varying degrees of each. Communists were able to seize power in Russia and China due to massive in-group fanaticism. Initially, the communists constituted less than 5% of the population in both countries, yet they gained control over the entire nation. The most radical communist factions won out because of their intense internal loyalty and lack of moral qualms, allowing them to commit brutal acts to establish authority. Mao Zedong, for example, criticized his rival Chiang Kai-shek for being too kind and deliberately caused mass atrocities to break Chiang's will. Similarly, Lenin cut a deal with the Germans while Russia was still at war with them, and there was widespread theft of resources from farmers during communist civil wars. Mao also allowed his nationalist opponents to bear the brunt of the fight against the Japanese, weakening them so the communists could later destroy them. Finally, they used Russia and China as bases to spread communism further. Communism spread across most of Asia and experimented in various parts of the world. This led to the bloodiest period in history by a significant margin, resulting in around 80 million deaths and severely stunting population growth in those regions, likely preventing the growth of hundreds of millions. Every communist nation, whether in Angola, Cuba, Russia, China, or nearly in Indonesia and Chile, experienced mass famine, totalitarianism, and societal throttling. If communism were a scientific experiment, it has been tested in every climate, civilization, and income range, with alternatives like Trotskyite, Stalinist, Maoist, Arab, or Third World variations. Despite their frequent portrayal as underdogs, communists argue that their failures were due to a lack of support from the liberal capitalist world. Ironically, during most of the Cold War, communists controlled a vast geographic area, encompassing a third of the human race and far more people than the capitalist world, along with significant resources. If controlling a third of the human race under optimal conditions isn't enough for their ideology to succeed, then the ideology itself is flawed. Despite their resources and populace, communist nations remained poorer. Communists often argue against comparing the USA and USSR due to different conditions, suggesting the USSR should be compared with Brazil. However, this comparison falls short, as the USSR had the same resources and land area but couldn't generate the same output. If a society values wealth and progress, American capitalism is ideal. The great irony is that the intellectuals who spearheaded communist revolutions lost out every single time. What typically happened was that a thug, often with a criminal background, seized total power and proceeded to purge every faction of communists who did not fully align with him. Eventually, even those who did agree with him were purged to instill fear among his followers. Societies are living, breathing organisms with various institutions that perform roles and contribute to wealth. However, the communist leaders sought to destroy any institution that did not directly lead back to them. In Russia, this was most extreme. The communists dismantled the indigenous family structure, religion, the officer class, intellectuals, and many ethnic minorities, including Jews who had significantly contributed to the revolution. They also targeted academic, intellectual, and artistic institutions, leaving only the secret police, which had carried out the purges. Communism thus became a cancer that devoured its civilizations without offering substantial benefits. Under communism, Russia managed to industrialize rapidly, but at a tremendous cost. Japan achieved similar industrialization under a market economy, proving that industrialization is not unique to communism. The growth under communism came from increasing input, while growth under capitalism came from increasing efficiency. North Korea initially grew faster than South Korea, but eventually slowed because its growth was based on increasing the workforce rather than efficiency, which is inherently scalable. This lost potential is evident in many countries, with Russia being the most notable example. Before the communists seized power, Russia was industrializing rapidly. Its population was growing massively, and it was a significant military, artistic, and intellectual powerhouse. However, the Russia left by the communists was a shell of its former self. Some argue that the communists promoted literacy or fast economic growth, but when compared to similar developments of that era, communism does not stand out positively. During the Cold War, communist countries were often more unequal than Western capitalist ones. For example, compare Chile and Cuba. While some claim Cuba has better literacy or health, Chile, which went capitalist, performs better in every statistic, despite both countries starting from the same place. Communism's abject failure was evident by the end of the 20th century, when the ruling class lost the will to continue. The Soviet Union was dismantled from within, and China and Vietnam turned capitalist. Living off materialistic assumptions, when the communists clearly failed economically compared to capitalism, they had no legs to stand on. Meanwhile, communism in the West shifted focus to supporting women, ethnic minorities, and sexual minorities. The complete failure of communism is easy to see when comparing North and South Korea, East and West Germany, Cuba and Chile, Russia and America, and many other comparable pairs.